Hi, everybody. My name is Deidre Muirhead, and I am the Health Education Manager here at the YWCA Health and Wellness Programs. And I have my colleague with me, Ms. Bianna Lormansley, who is the Health and Wellness Program Coordinator. And we welcome you to Wellness Wednesday, where we demystify health conditions that affect minority populations. I'm pleased to have with me Ms. Judine Hitchmon, a mental health consultant and valuable member of the YWCA South Florida, with us as well. In this next Wellness Wednesday series, we will continue to discuss the social determinants of health. The social determinants of health are non-medical factors that impact a person's health and well-being. And for today's topic, we're going to discuss the SDOH test and quality. So before we get into that, Ms. Judine, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Can you give us a little bit about your background and let the people know who you are?
Okay, as you mentioned before, I am the mental health consultant with the YWCA, specifically for their Head Start programs and early Head Start programs. I do have a license. I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Florida and Texas. I work specifically and have specialties in infant mental health and certificates in substance abuse and addictions. And so my biggest, the population that I love to work with the most is women and children, which is why I love working for the YWCA and, of course, participating in the programs that we employ in order to assist women and children in our community.
Well, thank you again, Judine, for that warm introduction. We're just going to jump right in and ask the first question. So I wanted to know, how does education access and quality fit into the framework of social determinants of health?
So, education, well, when we talk about social determinants of health, a lot of the times we're talking about people's access to certain things. And so when we look at it from the perspective of education, having access to education, poverty is one of the biggest things that would contribute to whether or not people have access to quality education. I think that that's one of the things that I saw in what we wanted to talk about today. It's not only do we want to look at the social determinants, but making sure that people have access to quality services that are available to them in the community. So when it comes to education, just knowing that a lot of how schools are funded, a lot of times it has to do with the majority of that funding comes from the local community. And so when we look at the local community, just specifically, it could be, where people live, what access they have to transportation, how close do they live to their job, how close do they live to their childcare agency. So all of these small different things, when we go down and put that microscope down to the local community, is what's going to give us maybe some barriers onto whether or not people can access or have access to quality education.
Thank you. That's a really, really good background and a starting point for us when we're talking about education access to in the framework of social determinants of health. So I wanted to ask, what sparked your interest in working in the educational field?
Well, education is fundamental. I think in a lot of ways, if we're talking about addressing barriers that people have to access, education is one of the biggest things that we can offer. It's free. So education is like a catalyst to allow people, a way to where they can access. So maybe, education doesn't always immediately give you quality, but it definitely gives you access. And, you just want people to get their foot in the door. So education to me is one of the ways that we get people's foot into the door to access.
And can you share some of those personal experiences or observations that highlight the impact of education on health outcomes?
I think of the Truth Campaign and things like that. When people provide people with education, a lot of times that changes their perspective. So if they wouldn't have otherwise have known how they're impacted in their health by the choices that they make, education and bringing forth that information to the masses is what gives people the opportunity to then make better choices. So to me, I feel like the Truth Campaign was one of the biggest things, right? Everybody, not only were we talking about the negative effects of what smoking does, but people got to visualize what effects smoking can have on your body, in your life. And I think that was, I think that really drove the point home, right? When people can visualize the effects, then it's definitely.
What are some of the major barriers to accessing quality education? I know that you mentioned some earlier, but can you give us some more or things that you've seen that are major barriers to accessing quality education in various communities?
Sure. So, I mean, poverty is a big thing. And the reason why I say poverty is because, like I mentioned, even though schools get funded through local, state, and federal taxes, most of that money is coming from the local community. And so, specifically, if transportation is not appropriate in that community, someone who has access to or lives on a main street where transportation is available, like let's say they live on a main street, like let's say 441 or 7th Avenue in our local community, they even have more access to transportation than, let's say, someone who lives in a more residential area in an impoverished community. They probably have to walk 3, 4, 5 blocks before they could even get access to transportation. So I think in a lot of ways, the core crust of it is how wealthy are our communities, but then it's to how can we add, how can education create wealth? Right? So I think in a lot of ways then too, those social determinants might make it more difficult for people to have access. But if we give them the education, how can we improve their lives so that they can then combat those barriers in other ways, right? By improving their economic stability, getting access to maybe better housing options that will allow for them to have more access to transportation. So it's like connecting the dots, right?
So on note of those barriers and just wealth affecting education access and quality, I wanted you to dive a little bit deeper on the impact of socioeconomic status on education access and quality.
I mean, just as I mentioned, if we're talking about, let's look at some initiatives that we have started in the state of Florida, like VPK in the start of 2005, 2006. Jeb Bush put this initiative out and created it like as a law to allow for people to have access to education prior to what we consider to be the time that children can enter into the public school system, which is free. So why we go always to poverty is because a lot of times when people don't have, financial stability, that drives the choices that they make. So for instance, children who live in impoverished communities where parents have no opportunity for their children to have access to education if they didn't have programs like VPK would mean that their child doesn't get introduced to education and to things that they need to know until the age of 5. So that's 5 years after a lot of children in other communities would have access to even reading, right? Going to their public library. If parents have to work varying schedules to meet their financial needs, and I say that to say if they don't work a regular 9-to-5 job, oftentimes we think about, oh, well, our parents work 9-to-5 jobs. Some parents work overnight and have to sleep throughout the day. And so they're not available to take maybe their children to the public school library system that's open from 8 to 5 p.m. Right? And so in a lot of ways, again, when you have to make those specific choices in your life based on what you have access to, what is available to you, even a bigger thing, I think is, stigma and discrimination is a social determinant of health, right? So simply off things that people cannot change. So off the stigma of access, maybe you have access, but you enter into an organization and the people who work within that organization are not familiar with dealing with certain people of a community or of a cultural background. That too can determine how much access you have in an area that you've been given access to. So I think in a lot of ways, it gets so complicated. We call that intersectionality, right? So when we have all of these things or all of these indicators that would either give us access or block our access, that's the different ways that we are intersecting in our community. And so maybe if we do have one thing that assists us, like maybe I have a good job, right? Maybe I have financial stability, but simply because I present as a Black woman could decrease my access to certain organizations and to certain resources that may be helpful and beneficial to me in my life and improve my health. But again, because I have other indicators that might create barriers for me, it gets complicated. It's really hard to pinpoint one thing and why we have to be aware of everything. That person, the social work framework is the person as an individual and the person in the environment. So we have to look at that person as an individual, who they are, what they represent, and then how they interact with people in the community and how the community interacts with them.
That was so good, Judine. Like, that was really good. I really love that explanation. I know that you mentioned VPK earlier as a program, but do you have or do you know of any other policies or interventions that have been most effective in improving education access and quality?
Well, VPK is a policy. And so we have Head Start, right? And Head Start is federal policy. And so the Head Start program is a federally funded program, and to me, I think is more widespread than the VPK program, because the VPK program is an initiative of the state of Florida. And so when we look at Head Start and its initiatives for the nation, right, for our education of children between the ages of 0 and 5, so this is the population that VPK also tried to target, but VPK is a little bit limited because it's only offered to 4 and 5-year-olds in our community. But Head Start, as a more national initiative for children between the ages of 0 to 5, the policies that they have is really like, if I could look at it in a more general state, it's like a no wrong door, and introducing the community to a multidisciplinary approach, which is more effective, right? And which makes it possible for there to be a no wrong door approach. So what do I mean by a no wrong door approach, right? It's like, if I go to an agency and I initially wanted to go there for one resource, but I had other resources that I needed access to, I walked into that door. They're not specifically made for that, but they're going to give me access to all of the resources that I need, because it doesn't matter what door I walk into. Whatever door I walk into, I'm going to have access to the resources that I need in order to better my life. And that's technically the way that the Head Start program functions, and why we have a multidisciplinary team is that we'll have a family come in, and even if we have issues with getting employment, we're dealing with the child as our client, but if the parent is having issues with employment, we have our family support service workers to assist them in establishing goals and making sure that they can help them. Does that mean that that child is not going to benefit from that resource and that access that that parent now gains? No, of course they do. Because if that parent now has access to gain financial stability, that could improve that child's life by access to different housing options, access to transportation, maybe access to different options for education, right? Because we also educate them on how to participate in the public school system, which will then give them information on choice and their ability to choose the school that they want, regardless of where they live, right? So,
and these programs sound really impactful. So in light of just talking about the programs and the role of the family workers and the social workers, I want to ask, what role do the teachers and school administrators play in addressing some of those social determinants of health related to education?
Okay. So I think administrators are the macro, right? The administrators have to look at the bigger picture. And so I would say that if for administration, one of their roles and responsibilities would be to ensure that the people that we hire, right, are reflective of the community that we're serving, because that's important. That in itself could really diminish a lot of stigma and discrimination that can occur within organizations, right? Oftentimes you'll hear people say that, one of the ways that we can combat, let's say, police brutality is to make sure that the police that are policing are reflective of the community that they're policing, and so that they have an insight into cultural differences that these communities have, right? And the perspectives that they may carry that might be different from the larger group at hand. And so why it's important for administrators is that when you're selecting, programming for the community, it's not specifically just what standards we need to meet, but how do we do that within this cultural perspective? How do we do that with the staff that we have? Are the staff educated on how social determinants of health can impact an individual child, their family, how they present themselves in the classroom? And just being aware of that gives you a perspective that allows for you to constantly be ready to make change if change needs to happen. For the teachers, I think in a lot of ways, understanding social determinants of health and their role and responsibility is to take that into consideration. And so we have one way to do things. We have to know that there's multiple ways by which our community can achieve the same goal. And if you're not putting that in perspective, that, hey, this child might be a little bit more tired than this child here because they're closer to a bus stop than this child is, and they had to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get here at 8 o'clock, while this family has one car, maybe not 2 cars, but one car, and they got to wake up an hour later in order to get to school. And having that inner perspective is going to determine what type of compassion you bring to your work every day, right? Same thing for administrators. How you see the people who work for you and the people that we serve, and what barriers they may be faced with in the community outside of how we're servicing them, will allow for you to be more beneficial in identifying what it is that we can do more to help them and support them and make sure that they could continue to have access to the resources that we have available to them, right? It's not because they show up to the door and they're there and we have the resources available, that we say, okay, good, we've done our job. It's also considering, how did you get here, right? How hard was it for you to get here? And who else can we reach in the community that you may know that may have a more difficult time getting here and they need those services?
That's really good. I really want to ask, what advice would you give to an organization or an individual looking to make an impact in this area? Like each of us every day, the everyday community member or organization.
I think I think all change starts with individuals. So I would say that it's really to just build on your self-awareness. To me, self-awareness is the ability to have foresight, insight, and hindsight, right? And so with that and all of those things working at the same time. And I feel that when you're constantly thinking and putting yourself in a position to use your self-awareness, then you're not ever making any statements like, oh, that's their problem, that's not my problem, right? Self-awareness says that, oh, this could be my problem, and even if it's not my problem right now, what is it that I can do about it, right? So self-awareness keeps you asking the right questions, not only for yourself and your own individual growth, but for how you can impact others.
Mm-hmm. So on light of self-awareness, I want to ask you, what do you think has been the most rewarding aspect of your work in this field?
Ooh. Huh? So many things are rewarding, I have to tell you. I really do love my job. I love what it is that I do. I say my most rewarding thing is being the conduit to access, right? That's rewarding for me. Is that even though I work in the Head Start program, the ability for me to meet with parents individually, meet with staff individually is a great outreach, right? And so in every opportunity that I have, just like they're looking for opportunities to educate their children, the ones that they have to care for on a daily basis, I'm looking for opportunities too that I can educate, my staff, the teachers, the administrators, the community, the families that we serve. If there's any way that I could give them education that they didn't have, or give them access to resources, or give them information about things that they had no idea about before, that's the most rewarding to me. It's that I can touch you even if you came for something else, right?
Okay, so just knowing you, I know my experience in like meeting you and talking with you and the change that you had on me. So I definitely appreciate all the work that you do, and I know we here at the YWCA appreciate you as well. I do want to ask, what challenges have you faced and how have you overcome them?
I face challenges all the time. And, when dealing with people, you're going to face challenges. I think that in a lot of ways, everybody who needs help doesn't know how to ask for help, right? And doesn't know how to access help. And I think that sometimes that's the biggest challenge, when you can recognize how you can help someone, but they are not in the position to either ask for it or to receive it. And those could be challenging, right? Because it's like, I have something to tell you, and I could probably get you to a better place than what you are right now if you would just give me the opportunity to get the in on you, right? And so it's working around that. And, not everybody, even if they know what is available to them, is ready to be helped. Like, it's almost like you go up to a homeless person, it's like you automatically give them food. You don't know if it's that they're hungry right now. Maybe their most important thing, what they want to do is make sure that they are under shelter because it's going to rain in the afternoon, right? So I think it's making sure, again, that's that self-awareness piece. This is, you're constantly thinking not just of yourself, but of other people and their perspective, and how sometimes that has nothing to do with you, right? And so it's constantly, the balance of it, the balance of being a helper and being the conduit, and knowing your place. That's what it is. Always making sure I know my place and know where I can be of most use, as opposed to where I think I can interject myself.
I love your compassion for people. I really
do. Thank you.
Looking ahead, what are your hopes for the future regarding education, access, and quality as a social determinant of health?
Oh my goodness. If I'm being honest, I really do want to see more social emotional development and mental health. We're getting it in initiatives in the pyramid model and things like that really do push the social emotional health of young children. But we have a lot of repairing to do. People who are already out in the community who didn't get the opportunity to understand what their emotions are and how to express them, and that they have the right to them even, and I think that that's something that I want to see education become a little bit more, forward moving in, right? And understanding that more than anything, it's like when you think about the nature and nurture of children, you're often thinking like, which one is the most important, but like essentially when you're working with children, that safety comes first all the time, right? And then everything else will happen, and you can work with everything else after safety is there. And so if we're looking at mental health and where it's been and things like that, if we're really focusing on safety, we definitely need to mind and pay focus on how people manage their mental health. That more than anything is going to initiate safety within ourselves and within the community. Because if we could regulate ourselves, then the community will follow along, because a lot of what we do and a lot of what we're capable of doing with our mental health, it requires modeling, right? If you could see other people do it, then you can believe that it could be done yourself.
And I just want to end off with saying your vision for the future is very inspiring. So I want to thank you for sharing all your valuable insights and your expertise with us today. Education access and quality are critical components of health social determinants, especially in minority communities. So understanding these factors can empower us to advocate for change and work towards more equitable health outcomes. So to our audience, I want to say thank you guys for joining us in this edition of Wellness Wednesdays. We hope that this discussion has provided you with a useful information and inspiration to continue learning about social determinants of health. Like Judine said, education is fundamental. It's powerful. And by addressing these non-medical factors, we can all contribute to healthier and more inclusive society. So stay tuned for our next Wellness Wednesday session. We'll be here to continue and explore important topics that impact our community. So until then, stay well and take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.